Welcome back to FinWeek Money Matters. Now, there are arguments that the property sector is slowly but surely becoming overtraded and closely held by big players. So the call is out to investigate opportunities in otherwise not so trendy markets. But trendy is in the eye of the beholder. Sports, especially rugby, has seen how rewarding access to the country's class can be. But are there opportunities for property players to make some inroads in these emerging markets here in South Africa? John Lewis, property sector strategist at FNB, and FinWeek Deputy Editor Thandisizwe Makluchana joining us at the desk. Garth Tennyson still with us. Thanks both so much for joining this conversation. Of course, we're talking about hotspots, the new hotspots in South Africa's property sector. Tell us about what we're seeing broadly right now.
Well, what we've seen probably over the past decade or so is a normalization of former black townships, or many of them, Soweto being the biggest example. And when I say normalization, they were typically, for many years, dormitory towns, whereas the former suburbs became more mixed-use areas with their own business nodes, their own big retail nodes. As things decentralized away from the old-fashioned CBD, the former white suburbs went through that process somewhere in the 70s and the 80s, and only more recently have many of the townships started doing the same. It's almost a no-brainer. It has to happen. It's a normal process. And that's what really started in the property boom years, where there's significant purchasing power in townships, not as much as in the suburbs, but they were underserviced in terms of retail, for instance. And that's what retailers have been trying to get in on is, yes, the income is low, but it's more underserviced than the saturated suburban areas. So let's go and put our shopping centres down there and sort of normalize these places into mixed-use areas and take use of the opportunities. That's been the big one, along with inner-city rejuvenation in some cases.
Where specifically are we talking about inner-city rejuvenation? Because Johannesburg's still going through that process, and are we there yet here? Well,
that's, yeah, Joburg's obviously the big one because that probably fell the hardest in the 80s and the 90s. We're still in the process. I think it's very much work in process. You have had the Newtown precincts coming out and other precincts there. I think there has been dramatic improvement. It probably hit rock bottom at about the end of the 90s, early last decade. But is it back to its former glories, the CBD? No, and not anywhere near. It used to be the place to be. And I don't think it ever will get back there. I think it's going to be a different type of rejuvenation, lower value economic activity and lower value retail activity and residential too. I don't think the luxury upmarket stuff is for the CBD anymore. That's going to stay in Sandton.
What benefit, Thandisizwe, would a business have setting up shop in an emerging township in a space where there is retail space available, as opposed to one of the suburbs where you know that spending power is higher and, of course, the cost of retail space a lot higher?
You know, it's interesting. I recently went to a mall called Jabulani in Soweto for 2 consecutive days, and this was way after the whole December Christmas shopping period. And each of those days, it was so packed as if it was, you know, Christmas shopping as per normal. And when I asked people, you know, patrons around, the resounding noise was that this is how the shopping mall is every day. So as much as, you know, there is low income, but I think the mass is critical, the amount of people that you are able to reach, because transport costs are a problem to go from Jabulani Mall to Soweto. So by bringing, you know, that retail reach to that market, and I mean, like I said, the mass is a critical reach, because I mean, you look at Soweto as a market, it's a massive market, and if you are able to bring it closer to them, to bring, you know, the products closer to them, to bring the access of shopping closer to them, I think the opportunities are vast. And also, I mean, you look at townships. Townships are appealing in a lot of ways because they are essentially the iconic areas of where apartheid took place, and there are some sections, if you go to Soweto, where, for example, Nelson Mandela lived and Desmond Tutu lived, and there's a lot of vibrancy that has been created and built around those, you know, national spots, if you will.
But ultimately, also, you need to take into consideration that you have the right product for a market that you're appealing to in a township.
Sure.
Yeah.
Look, it's very interesting. Throughout, you know, the development of South Africa, if you go to those markets, I bet you there is not a single household that does not have, for example, a DSTV decoder. So, you know, as much as budgets are stretched, those guys are still able to afford the product. And I mean, I think you make a good point by saying, is it the right product for them? And I think we've seen how hungry they are to get good products, to get products that are of convenience to them. And, you know, there's also an emergence of what they call chisanyamas. And they're often able to attract you know, the affluent of the affluent, who perhaps come from a Soweto but have made it in life and have gone off to live in you know, in a Sandton, for example. But when they go back there, they're still able to get pretty much, you know, all of the products that they want for daily use. I mean, some of them do visit their parents, and you know, getting those products that are convenient to their lives and knowing that it's down the road, it's the shop down the road, I think it also creates a lot of convenience. And I think the products are pretty much what you know, the market wants.
I think there's two words that spring to mind when you think of sort of property investment in the townships. The one is footfall and the other one is aspirational. And I spoke to the CEO of Robosis a couple of months ago, and he said to me, if they can find a retail space in a township, they go for it. And he gave me figures which I don't have on hand now, but he compared some of the footfall rates in township areas or areas servicing that market versus your footfall rates in say, you know, an older, more established residential area like Hyde Park. And it's off the charts. You've just got way more people going through, and because there's this aspirational kind of element to the population living there, ultimately it's a better retail investment.
I think that's a very good point, Garth. I mean, in Soweto there is a new car dealership, and you'd be very surprised to hear that it's doing very, very well. And I think it was the first car dealership that was ever brought into a township. I mean, in Cape Town there is not a single dealership that is in the township, but it's that aspiration that makes a difference. For
a property investor who's looking to local properties and looking to the township space as opposed to like the retail space, are there opportunities in the kind of housing sector in the townships to develop, say, townhouses?
I suspect there. Well. The one thing I have been told by developers is a lot of people still like freehold with their own patch. I guess that's a typically South African phenomenon.
Because we have space.
But certainly, I mean, if you look at the suburbs, we have been moving over the years more into clusters, and it offers security, and it is smaller garden areas. And my guess is it would not be that much different in township areas in future years, because urban land values have been rising. So affordability is what it's all about, and the clusters offer that affordability. I suspect there would be the opportunities for that.
What would you say would be the risks building a townhouse in a township as opposed to a suburban area?
I'm not sure the risks are very different. The risks are probably very much the same when you've got these sectional title complexes, the financial state of the body corporate, and you know how the whole thing gets run by that, if you could call it the local government, which is the body corporate, is very important. And some sectional title, many sectional title cluster, what would you call it, setups, they come unstuck. They get into trouble. I think the same risk that applies to sectional title in the former white suburbs applies to the former townships. It can be troublesome if the thing isn't properly run.
Let's talk about inner cities right now and rejuvenation of inner cities, because just looking at Johannesburg, there are a lot of trendy spots that have emerged. But the question is, do people actually want to live in town, and to what extent does that limit the growth and the kind of rejuvenation of town? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the question is who wants to live in town. Yeah. And one of the things I've picked up from speaking to guys like John is, and you touched on it just now, is there was a time where, you know, having a New York loft style apartment in Joburg was supposedly the in thing. And from what I'm hearing, they just aren't doing that well, because the LSM or the demographic that's living there is not really
aspiring to that.
Yeah, it's not a part of the country that attracts the LSM who can afford you know, huge, fancy New York loft-style apartments. As John said, those sort of people would prefer to live in Sandton. So I think lower income residential, lower income retail is really the future of the CBD. What I'm interested in is what parts of the CBD could become future desirable, trendy living areas. One of the areas I was in a while back is Brixton, and I thought to myself, you know, with a bit of imagination, this could be the next Parkhurst. It's quite close to Braamfontein, where you've got things like the neighbourhoods market, etc. There's a lot of universities nearby, so I think it's just about what part of, or what sort of people are likely to be living in the CBD 5-10 years from now.
Mm-hmm. And what are your thoughts on that, John, in terms of LSM Group right now? Do you think there could be a mixture ultimately between aspirational New York style loft apartment goers, or is it going to be lower LSM groups?
No, you know, I think Cape Town's very different. It's got a waterfront, it's got the sea view, it's got yacht basins to overlook and things like that, and those are typically attractions for the rich. Joburg CBD doesn't have it. You've got a view of a mine dump and in a sort of lifted up freeway. It's not particularly pretty. Mm-hmm. So I think it is lower income. Look, I think we've learnt a lot of these lessons as to who it is long time ago.
Yeah.
Hillbrow once upon a time was the place where young working people used to stay in the apartheid era. Often people, graduates, you know, just starting out, cheap transport costs down the road into town to the corporates they worked at. And then as soon as they became sort of significantly higher income after a few years and they got married and they had kids, then they moved off to the suburbs. I knew a lot of people who started their working life in Hillbrow. That's how I envisage it yet again. I can't imagine, as I say, Sandton...
Traffic is a major problem though, and that has been one of the key reasons that it hasn't gone back to its former days of glory, if we're talking about Johannesburg specifically.
Yeah, I think traffic is a key one. I think it's also a change in the way corporates used to think. You know, back in the days, you know, you'd arrived when you were the CEO and you were on the highest high-rise building in the city centre. You know, that was like the status symbol. I read an article to that effect in the US a number of years ago, where that just isn't the status symbol anymore. It was better, it was more sort of fancy or fashionable to be in an office park with a few gardens and buck and fountains, but more space. So, you know, it might just have been the fashion, the way people wanted to work, which had changed. But yes, Joburg CBD hasn't been designed with very wide roads and nice parking. It's unfortunate that, you know, the traffic is a problem. But it offers great opportunity in terms of public transport. I suspect for your lower income working people who make use of public transport, the CBD is much more accessible than Sandton. Besides the taxi industry and the buses that, you know, run that way, the trains, the metro rail, it's got it all there. Bit of a facelift for the metro rail and so on. You've got seriously good public transport for those people who want to use it.
I'm interested in one thing. Is today's kind of young trendy area tomorrow's slum? Is that a rule of thumb sometimes in property economics?
Well, I think all areas just about go in some sort of cycle, or most areas. So yes, I mean, that's probably the same as saying today's boom is tomorrow's slump. You know, that's how the world works. It is in cycles. Areas, they go backwards. You know, even the Cape Town CBD at one stage looked like it was teetering on the brink a number of years ago. It didn't go as far downhill as Joburg CBD, but, you know, I think just about all areas across the world work in some sort of cycle.
If you're a commercial property developer and you're looking to attract businesses that are wanting to set up their base in town, whether it be Nelson Mandela Bay, Johannesburg City Centre, what type of businesses should you be looking to attract?
Well, I suspect it... Look, it could be corporates, but I suspect it would be more, you know, back office, lower value type of activity and not client facing, you know. So you might want to put your call centers in, and but yes, if you've got fancy upmarket clients coming to visit your premises from time to time, you'd probably want that part of it in Sandton, you know. So it could be the same corporates that operate out of Sandton, just putting different activities in big high-rise buildings in the Joburg CBD and making it accessible for those employees because of the public transport, I think, that exists there.
Do you have any figures on rents in the CBD? Because anecdotally, I've heard from people that actually it's not that cheap to rent in the CBD.
I'm afraid I don't. No, not on the top of my head. I don't.
Yeah.
But I mean, have you heard that sort of theory that it's not necessarily cheaper to go there, or?
Well, my guess is that it's possibly not. Some of these, you're talking residential specifically.
Either or.
But if you're talking residential, my guess is, yeah, you know, these guys have put a lot of investment into upgrading a lot of these buildings and making them acceptable, so it probably doesn't come cheap either. But the beauty of young, lower income working people being in the CBD is the transport costs they save on. if they are working right next, a few blocks away.
What's your sense? If you're a property developer now, should you go for inner cities or should you go for the townships?
Look, I think both ways, but I'll go to the township question. I think the opportunities are definitely there. I think after 2008, the whole financial economic crisis, the migration of people to suburban areas sort of slowed down because of affordability reasons. So, I mean, that's an opportunity. And also, I think it's also an opportunity to, if you're starting a business like a call center, as John had said, if you're starting a business like a call center and you know that the job market for you are the people in Soweto, it sort of saves on a lot of costs in terms of rent, because if you open up your call center in Soweto, I'm sure it might be cheaper to either build up one or rent an existing infrastructure or redevelop it to the state you want, as opposed to going and renting a big building in Sentin. And also it saves on time and productivity for your staff to go to work. I mean, transport, like we said, is a major issue, and to access areas like Sentin is another, headache. You have to take 3 or 4 taxis to get a Sentin. But if you have, the offices there, it's literally a walk away for some.